Howdy,
Okay,
everyone.
so welcome to Volley Fire Friday. I'm joined with 11 Bang Bang. Murphy's Muskets is a bit under the weather today. So, 11 Bang Bang, how have you been doing?
Oh, been doing fine and dandy. Easy
Excellent.
money.
Yeah, that's always a good thing.
Yep. And I bought a new musket today, so that's always a plus.
Now, what musket did you get?
The 1779 French Naval Personnel musket.
Oh, you did get that one.
I, yep, I got it.
And that one,
So,
and that one's got the weird engraving on the stock, right?
yep, it does.
Okay.
Had to buy it
Any
for the engraving.
for science.
Yes, for science.
Yeah. What any other headway on what it could mean?
Nope.
Kind of.
until I get hands on. I got some people showing up down here. I'm gonna go outside. Uh, until I got hands on and I can actually see it in person. Yeah, I have no clue yet, but we'll figure it out. I'm bound to determine.
Oh yeah, 100%. Like it's quite a mystery, and I wish I had a photo of it to put it up here on the screen.
Yeah. Um.
So if anybody
Yeah.
knows anything about those muskets, it would be very cool if you could chime in on that.
Yeah.
So
I've got a bunch of books coming in on it just to try to figure it out because every single one of those, every single one of those 1779s that I've seen has that on it. Albeit it's different writing, but
yeah,
they all have some sort of name on the stock like that or something.
gotcha. Yeah, and for some
But
reason this one translates to attic, which no idea really what that means or
yeah,
why
it's a
why
bit of a
even.
mystery.
Yeah. So that does kind of tie into what we are. It's a little bit later, but a little bit later than last Mohicans. But
Yep.
I did try to incorporate, and I think I did get it. You had mentioned scalping last week, so
Yep.
so
Yeah, the French. Oh, go ahead.
I was able to incorporate that scene into the background for you. I
Okay.
thought you might like that.
Yep. French and Indian War was pretty brutal, and there was a lot of scalping that happened.
Yeah, there was quite a bit. And if I'm not mistaken, I think it was the French that, well, supposedly, and it could all just be like the British blaming the French for it, but I guess they taught the natives to scalp, or that's how they wanted confirmed kills, or something like that.
Yeah, something like that. I've heard. Uh, not a not 100% sure on it, but I think is the case of where it all kind of stems from
Yeah.
as a basically a proof of your participation in the war.
Yeah, definitely. Um, so let's see. So just to get an idea of, I mean, obviously, people in they can see the background and see the natives and how they have them painted up, but the natives were pretty intense when it came to their war paint, and
Yeah,
a lot of times it would be like a full body paint where they would just go in with like their leggings and their breechcloth and everything, and it was just hacking away and stuff like that. But I've got a picture up here of some natives.
yeah. For some reason I can't see anything on there, but
Yeah, so definitely gonna fix that for next week. Totally think we're gonna go, or I'm gonna go to
okay.
a totally different platform. But
Yep.
yeah, I don't know if you can see the picture yet, but there it is. Um, so yeah, that would be. I know, like when I was reenacting like a lot of the Cherokee stuff, like their common color was to paint themselves completely red, and
Yep.
have like some black face paint or something like that. But just imagining that coming out of the woods would be quite terrifying. And I guess for some context, like a lot of people say that the 7 Years' War, as it was known in Europe, or the French and Indian War here in America, it was like a worldwide, almost like a world war.
Yes, I have said many times that what we call World War One was not. It wasn't even the Second World War, because you have the War of Austria, which hail as the 7 War
Yeah.
in a lot of different places before the French and Indian War or the 7 Years' War. And then you got the 7 Years' War, which spans all the way from Southeast Asia to Africa, North America, Europe. It's all over the world. And
Yes.
so it's almost I'm sure there's probably another one beforehand that was just as large a scale, but to me, the 7 Years' War, the French and Indian War, is kind of the true First World War, and the American War for Independence or the Revolutionary War was the true Second War.
Yeah, I could definitely see that, especially because things from like India and stuff like that was being affected from a lot of this as well. But even from the
Yep,
map, you can see all the different countries that were involved in the 7 Years' War, and it's quite a bit. Um,
yep,
Pretty remarkable for the 18th century. For something in North America to affect stuff all the way in Polynesia and in Asia and stuff like that.
yep.
But yeah, pretty crazy.
And it all started with, well, I say it all started. The whole situation was, I was explaining it to a person today, the whole situation in and of itself was a powder keg. All it took was a spark to ignite that powder keg, and that spark had very young George Washington.
Yeah, yeah. Really, what's crazy is how a lot of like it's sort of like the American Civil War where you have like these key players, but like
Mm-hmm.
this is sort of like before their moment, but you can see them still playing a key part. I mean, he kind of
Yep.
sparked it and then led
Him and the
America.
Half King.
Yeah,
Half King played a pretty important role, but George Washington was kind of the one who got him rolling. And then once he got him rolling, couldn't get him stopped.
yeah. Now, if I'm not mistaken, that was the Fort Necessity incident, or is that
So
completely different?
I can't I can't remember the technical name of the massacre. Um, I don't even the name somewhere, but it led to the Battle of
Ah, your connection's kind of breaking up. Hello? Uh-oh, I think we might have lost you. You there? Well, I think we might have lost him. He might have a bad connection where he's at. I'm sure he's probably walking back to probably a better connection area. But until he gets back, and like I said, Murphy's Muskets was going to join us tonight, but he is definitely feeling under the weather. So it was best that he took a back seat on tonight. But he'll probably be back next week. But let me go to some comments real quick until 11 Bang Bang gets back. Rock McLaughlin, hello from Tennessee, making popcorn. Yes, I miss Tennessee quite a bit. Hardy, he's got his Mountain Dew, some barbecue burnt ends, and a loaded pipe. Hey, Hardy, what are you? What
There
you
you
got?
are.
What you got in your pipe? Oh,
Lost you for
okay.
a second.
Yeah. So I was just going over some comments until you got back. But
Okay.
Hardy said he's got his pipe loaded up, so I was wondering what he's got in there.
Oh, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. Howdy, Hardy. Howdy, Hardy. Ah.
Howdy, howdy. Yep.
Yep.
Let's see.
But yeah, I'm pretty sure. Well, I'm not pretty sure. I know they kind of brush on Braddock's defeat at the Battle of Monongahela said,
Yeah.
compared to
Oh, that connection's kicking your butt. Let's see. You still there, or did it lose you again? Sounds like it dropped you again. Yeah. Let's go back to the comments until he gets back. Let's see. Fragger frags a lot. Like the name. That's a pretty epic name. 2 YouTubers that helped me get into flintlocks. Yep. Well, glad we were able to get someone back into flintlocks and spark some new interest. So definitely think you guys are gonna like a lot of the 18th century stuff coming out. Hardy's got some of his grandfather's old stash of whatever he was smoking when he died. Bought 100 ounces at a time, so I got a ways to go. Man, that's a lot. Yeah, 100 ounces, that's quite a bit.
hello.
Yep, you
There we
there?
go.
Okay.
Yeah, my internet keeps on going out. I think I read something today about Verizon being a part of the whole AT&T thing, and I think my internet's not doing too well. But I got hooked up to the Wi-Fi now, so
Nice.
hopefully it's better.
Yeah, it definitely sounds a lot better. Yeah, I know AT&T totally wiped out my phone because I use AT&T, and
Yep.
yeah, it totally nuked it for like 2 days.
Yep.
It was great.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
They're gonna take you back to the 18th century.
That's what I felt like. I felt like Little House on the Prairie, you know that meme where it's
Yeah, you
yeah,
saw that meme.
yeah. And then I also saw the one where it's like, well, they don't know it's out anyway because they never have service, which is also pretty true.
Yep.
So, yeah. So, pretty good times.
But yeah.
So let's see. Back to the massacre, back to the battle. That started it all.
Oh, with Washington?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was pretty straightforward. Basically, if I remember right, it was a French envoy.
Mm-hmm.
And they were not trying to get involved in like combat or anything. They weren't even at war technically.
Yes.
With the British at the time. I mean, not technically, they weren't at war. And if I remember right, they were on the British side. And yeah, Washington opened up on them. But the French, it's interesting when you look at how land was established back then, because the French did what they called the lead plate expedition. And basically, they went down the Ohio River with they had a priest, they had some explorers, they had some soldiers, and they went down the Ohio River and they would place lead plates on trees. They nail them to trees, saying that this was the property of France.
Yep.
Everything on this side of the river. And that was kind of what led into it, because then British settlers, you have the differing opinions of what they're wanting to do with North America. You got the French who are wanting North America for furs, for fashion, for felt, and then you got the English who want it for farms and land, and the English are actually wanting to settle it, whereas the French are kind of just wanting it for the furs, and they're more friendly to the native populations
Yeah,
that are there.
yeah, it's kind of interesting. They're differing perspectives on what to do with it. I mean, if I
Yep.
had like a whole continent at my disposal, I mean, gosh, I can't imagine like trying to give that up.
Yep. And it's a lot of ground.
Oh yeah, I mean, just the Louisiana Purchase on its own. I mean, gosh, that was a lot of
Yep.
land.
Yep.
But yeah, that's just looking at the map. I mean, you can just see the huge expanse. And France, I mean, had a huge claim to it.
Yes. And that was all because of that the lead plate expedition. They, like I said, you put a lead plate on somewhere and say this is ours, and then go away. And that's really hard to defend. versus the British, who are actually moving in. Like I said, they're moving in settlers, and the settlers are moving in more settlers, and towns are being built, and all this sort of thing.
Yep.
It's a lot easier to arm a militia that way than versus just throwing out a claim of, hey, I own this.
Yeah, and I know like the Appalachians were definitely, what was it, the
Yep.
proclamation line, like the British were not supposed to go past it, but
Yep.
settlers totally did.
Did. Yep. You had the whole regulator rebellion.
Oh yeah, that was quite something.
That was part of it.
Yep.
Yep.
That was definitely a pretty heated thing in my neck of the woods.
Yep.
And then
yeah.
Let's see. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but Fort Dobbs. It was a. Let's see. It was like a backcountry. Where's the picture for it? I've got the picture. It was a blockhouse style fort. They actually reconstructed it, so it's an actual fort. I haven't been there now, or yet.
Yeah.
But all wood construction, and it's just really neat because it was like one of those frontier forts at that time, kind of out in the middle of nowhere. And when they had the raiding parties or whatever, that's where everybody kind of gathered at.
Yep.
But
yep. So funny story about that. Kind of getting off the French and Indian War just for a second here. Fast forward 120 years to the 1870s, whenever you're starting to see the Northern Plain tribes and those wars heating up after the failure that was known as the Medicine Lodge Peace Treaty, which was signed right down the road from me.
Yeah.
The settlers in my neck of the woods, when all that was happening, they were kind of caught in between the army and the local tribes there. And so they would do the same thing. They set up, they weren't forts per se, they were stockades. But they would set them up ever so often, but they were actually very intricate. They had, basically they would dig ditches around them. They would put kind of like makeshift drawbridges, double walled, actually pretty intricate. And one of those stockades is about 20 feet away from my front door. Is
no
where
way.
It was. It's a park. Yeah, it's a parking lot now, but one of the stockades was just right across the street from where I live now.
Man, that is so cool. Yeah, and it's little things like that in history that's just amazing.
Yep.
Yeah, that really is. I had no idea.
Yeah, but anyhow, I guess going back to the French and Indian War, I guess you got any more questions or topics on that?
Yeah, it's just it all kind of intertwines, and it's like last week where you start with the Patriot and you wind up somehow in Vietnam.
Yep.
It's just it's neat how it all ties in.
Yes.
But yeah,
and that's the thing about history most people don't realize. I need to make a video on it sometime. You can trace that incident of George Washington in the woods with those Frenchmen all the way up until leading into World War II in Iraq and Vietnam in a very roundabout way. They all tie in together.
Yeah, because World War I definitely got rid of like the British aristocracy and everything, or not really got rid of it, but it definitely pumped the brakes on it, or severely, it just decimated it, I guess is the best term, because the majority of the officer corps was killed, which was a lot of your nobility. And so after that, a lot of those countries that Britain was lording over wanted their independence, and they got it.
Yep.
And then you have a lot of the effects of what you see in the Middle East, because they just divided things up on lines and didn't care about tribal lands. And I guess it's the same thing in Africa.
Yep, and that can actually, a lot of that can be, I just got done reading Napoleon in Egypt. A lot of that can be traced to the Napoleonic War too, because the French during the Napoleonic War were afraid of English domination in the Mediterranean, and so they, of course, invaded Egypt.
Yeah.
And then that led into chasing down the leaders of Egypt to Syria. And I actually, fun fact there, one of the castles that Napoleon had tried to take and failed, I have actually stayed in.
Oh, that is pretty neat.
In it. Yep. So, but that whenever the English actually came in after the Battle of the Nile, they asserted dominance in Egypt and the Middle East, which they would hold until, clear up into World War I, World War II.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you got the Battle of Trafalgar. That put the British Navy at the top of the food chain for the next 100+ years.
Yep, sure did.
But anyhow, yep, there you go. I went on another rabbit trail.
Yeah, no, it's all good. Yeah, and like I said, it goes down different rabbit holes.
Yep.
But let's getting back to the natives and the French and Indian War. I think the British had a pretty good relation. Well, as good. Well, okay. How do I word this? I think relations between the British and the Cherokee were one
It's
of
pretty good.
yeah, it was pretty good.
Yep.
Um, and so they even sent like Cherokee, like a delegation of them over to London, and I
Yep.
have their picture right here. Um, so they got on the ships and went over there and allowed the king to see. They brought various things like tobacco and stuff like that, which I mean, uh, the King of England, King George, he's already had all that stuff and everything because they'd had that
Yep.
for about 100 years. But it was just neat to see how they were dressed with a lot of like their native stuff. So like the blanket that they had around them is called a match coat, and I should have drug mine out because I have one. Why did I
Yeah.
not? Why did I not do that? That was really dumb on my part. um, yeah.
It
So
happens.
yeah. So basically, it was like a trade blanket, and they would sew silk strips onto it and everything, and they were very elegant. I should have got more pictures of that like in color because it's very intricate. And their beadwork too was amazing.
Yep.
It was just kind of like one of those little neat things about reenacting that era is the different items that would come from worldwide, uh, getting traded here in North America and stuff like that. And a lot of it was used to kind of, I don't want to say pay off the Cherokee or sort of give them incentive, I guess, to be on the British side.
Yep.
And I think
Uh,
the British did try to do a good job at keeping people from crossing the Appalachians, but it was just inevitable,
yep.
unfortunately.
Yeah, it was definitely already going to happen.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to think of the name of the guy, the Indian agent is what they called him. That the British had sent in that secured their alliances with the tribes they did have on their side.
I want to say it was
But
Timberlake. He did a memoir. I think he was like a lieutenant.
I think it was.
Yeah. And I think he was really mad at the end of everything when the Cherokee kind of got shoved to the side.
Yep. And yeah, I think you're right. I think that's who that is. And that was a pretty important role because, like we were talking about, the French had good relations for the most part right off the bat.
Yeah.
Whereas the English, yeah, not so much.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Let's see. And just in case anybody's wanting to know what a war party looked like, that's kind of like how they would dress. And, it was, they didn't wear a whole lot of clothes because you don't want stuff getting caught up in the bushes and the trees and thorns
Yep.
and stuff like that. A lot of like, I think Last of the Mohicans did a really good job at capturing that aspect because they were very sparsely equipped
Yep.
on their like ambushes and things like that. Nothing flashy, nothing. It's just knives and maybe a musket and then their tomahawks.
Yep.
Which they were
Uh,
very deadly with tomahawks.
yeah. As far as firearms go, they would be using a lot. The French musket really got French muskets in general, and this is my tangent on French muskets. You know my thoughts on those.
Yeah.
Uh,
Oh no.
the
Lay into it.
the French and Indian War is very instrumental in revamping how the French go about making muskets and how they go about issuing them out. And because during the French and Indian War, you see kind of a hodgepodge of different things that even the French troops are carrying.
Mm-hmm.
You're gonna see a lot of 1717s, which were the kind of outdated. They obviously weren't obsolete, more just obsolescent.
Yeah.
Wooden rammers, things like that. But for the most part, you're going to see a lot of the fusil de chasse, the fusil de trait, the fusil ordinaire. Every now and then you might see a chief with a fusil fin, or the
Mm-hmm.
fine gun, the hunting gun, the trade gun, and the ordinary gun.
Yep.
That's how they named them at the time. But these guns were not. Uh, they were sometimes modified, but they weren't designed to be used with a bayonet. And that is very critical in 18th century warfare whenever you get into linear combat. The
Yeah.
thing about the French and Indian War and here in North America, there was very little linear combat. Like people talk about, fighting in the trees, and that was how, we beat the British in the Revolutionary War. No, the Revolutionary War was one, uh, it was a mixture of both, because you got like battles of Kings Mountain, where it is in the trees, or the Battle of Bennington.
Yeah.
It is in the trees. It is very guerrilla warfare style. But for the most part, it's all line combat. Whereas in the French and Indian War, you're not going to see a whole lot of artillery. And the ones you do, you're going to see are 3 and 6 pound cannons. You will see mortars, siege mortars. They get used at the Battle of Fort William Henry.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, this is something I heard, and I'm not 100% sure on it because I haven't verified it, but I have heard that the actual mortars that they use in the movie were actually brought to there from Fort Ticonderoga. They were original mortars that they
Hmm.
used on the set from the American War of Independence.
Oh, that's
So,
interesting.
and I've heard that from several different sources, but it's kind of one of them things that unless I have really solid proof, I I kind of take it with a grain of salt. But
Yeah.
so yeah, siege mortars are a thing. 3 and 6 pounders, you're not going to hardly see much more than a 6 pounder.
Yeah.
Revolutionary War, they get bigger, but the reason why you don't see those anything much larger than a 3 or 6 pounder is because roads. Uh,
Yep.
that part of the country had not been very well cultivated, shall we say?
Yeah.
And so,
Especially the backcountry areas.
yep. So you try to drag a 24 pounder cannon through a deer trail,
Yep.
it's just not. It's not feasible. And the
Yep.
mud, cannons getting bogged down in the mud, that was a thing. That was a concern.
Yep.
So, but yeah, the French and Indian War, it's 90% guerrilla warfare until you get to basically the Plains of Abraham.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. And I know, like, so on the eastern side of the U.S., you've got uh, they were native trails. They were called warpaths, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure you've heard of them. But they were well
Yep.
established track or paths. But I don't like.
They could be muddy, and
Yeah,
it's a
and
very good spot to get ambushed.
exactly. Like, but what's also interesting is like when the natives would go to war, it was sort of like a thing of respect. Like if you were caught on the warpath, it's sort of like you were off limits. Um,
Yeah. Okay.
it's really weird. Like you have like this subset of rules, I mean, like you have the gentlemanly rules of Europe, but then the natives also
Yeah.
had like their own set where it's like, okay, you're on the war's path, like, maybe we'll follow you until your destination, but we're not going to attack you on the road.
Yeah.
Um, but I would
Well, it's just
go
go
ahead.
ahead.
I was gonna
Oh
say
well, I
I don't.
was
Oh, okay. I was gonna
so I didn't.
go
Go
ahead.
ahead. I'm sorry. I think there's a delay here.
Yeah. So I think the paths were like slightly bigger than a deer trail, but nothing like, not like an interstate, of
Yep.
course.
Not
But
something you'd want to take some big artillery across.
yeah, it's not gonna make it.
Uh, um, yeah. See, I didn't know. I've obviously heard of the warpaths, but I didn't know about the whole being off limits. That's pretty interesting. I guess that goes to like you're talking about the gentlemanly warfare. Uh, I've kind of, the more I've really read into it, like it wasn't necessarily so much just trying to be like, gentlemanly, like they portray a lot of times in the movies,
Yep.
where, oh, we won't do this because that would not be gentlemanly. Like, now there was that to an extent,
Yeah.
namely shooting officers. That was viewed as off limits, until, like you got the Battle of Cowpens in the American Revolutionary War, where you have British officers taking 80% casualties in 5 seconds.
Thanks, Mel
Uh,
Gibson. Yeah.
yep. And that's the thing. The Patriot. I know that was kind of last week's, but the
Yep.
Patriot is one movie that it gets a lot wrong. But
Yeah.
the Battle of Cowpens, they pretty much nailed it. The only things that I saw where they had Cornwallis there, Cornwallis wasn't actually at Cowpens. He was already in the he was a ways back. Tarleton was 100% in charge of that
Yeah.
little excursion. And the other thing was, they show in the Patriot, they show them softening up the British lines with artillery. In real life, it was Morgan's rifles, who were on line, albeit a different style of line, a skirmisher line,
Mm-hmm.
halfway down the field, trying to coax them over that ridge line. And then, like I said, once they got over that ridge line, it was, I think, like I said, I think they took 80% casualty rate to their chain of command in like 5 seconds, because
Yeah.
almost that entire first volley was specifically aimed at any officer or NCO in the line to break order.
I mean, you gotta do what you gotta do.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
But going back to, like I said, the gentlemanly warfare thing, it's kind of like because some people, if you ask them, why did they fight in lines, and they'll be like, well, it was the gentlemanly way of fighting warfare. I'm like, no, that really wasn't.
No.
You take something like a musket, which, depending on the soldier, can take anywhere from about 15 to 20 seconds to reload as an individual. But when you put them all together as a regiment, you've got something with more firepower, I would say, than an M240 machine gun nowadays.
Yeah. I mean,
Um,
it. It's like it. I think it was all about structure, and it
yep,
was really smart the way they put it together. Like it, for what they had, it wasn't stupid. I mean,
yep,
don't get me wrong. I don't want to go, stand in front of somebody and shoot, but like
yep,
for what they had, like it was probably the best tactic that you could employ.
yep.
Um, because you
Because
had the law.
you also have to think about, nowadays we have radios.
Yeah.
We can talk to each other over radios.
Mm-hmm.
Back then, you I don't know if you've ever watched the series Sharp. It's not historically accurate hardly at all.
Yeah.
But there's a line in there that Sean Bean says, and it's perfect. He says, "You'll never see the French troops." He's like, "You won't see a battle." He's like, "You'll hear it, you'll smell it," and he's like, "And then you'll feel it." He's like, "You won't see the French troops coming towards you." He's like, "You're going to see a wall of smoke." He's like, "That's what you're going to see." And he's like, and then by the time, they close in, and it kind of just explains how chaotic the 18th century battlefield could be. And really, the only way of getting orders down the line sometimes was having people in lines all the way down the line.
Yep.
Um, and not only that, it was a morale thing too.
Yeah.
You're out there in the smoke and you're all by yourself is a different story than if you're sitting there and, I mean, you're in the military. You know how it is.
Yep.
You see something that you would normally not do on your own, but you see everybody else is doing it, and you're like, well, I can't let the guys down.
Yeah.
So you're
That
not going to be
was.
that guy that turns and runs.
Yeah. It was definitely a morale thing, and Hardy brought up a good point. He said back then your radio was a big set of lungs and some dudes waving flags, which is very. I mean,
Yep,
that's where the Signal Corps came from with the flags
yep.
and stuff, and it's still part of their
Flags,
insignia.
depending on the time period, it could be
Yep.
flags, drums, bugles. Later on,
Yep.
uh,
And then
sometimes word of mouth,
yeah.
coming, like I said, coming down the line. Uh, I'm trying to think. There's some more. Another one that I think is funny is people like to make fun of the uniforms back then. And
Oh
they're
my
like, well,
goodness. Yeah.
they didn't have any camouflage, and I'm like, well, there's several reasons for that.
Yeah.
Namely, for the British, the reason they chose red because it was the cheapest dye they could get a hold of. And for the
Mm-hmm.
French, they went with white because it was cheap and it's a good way to avoid fratricide,
Yeah.
you know, shooting your own people. And it goes down even on a further level because different units you'll see later on, like in the Napoleonic War, which is, from the French and Indian War, it's going to be another 30, 40
30,
years.
40 years.
Um,
Yeah.
but you start to see things like the idea of the plumes on the shakos,
Yeah.
or depending on the time period, or the tricorn. Sometimes where you see plumes, and then later on you see what they call the pom poms,
Yeah.
and people are like, well, those look really silly and they make you stand out. And I'm like, yes, that is the point. It makes you stand out. So your general who's sitting on a hill looking at this thing from a mile and a half away can look and say, oh, I see red plumes there. That is this regiment. I can see orange over here. That's this regiment.
Yep.
And there's a method to the madness.
Yeah, there definitely is, and it's all about control of the troops.
Mm-hmm.
It's easier to see, red team or blue team or white team for the French, uh,
Okay,
and
thanks.
even like going back to the camouflage aspect. You sort of started seeing experimentation with Rogers Rangers and the Jaegers
Yep.
and stuff like that, which
Mm-hmm.
I kind of wish the Patriot kind of touched on that a little bit because I heard that the Hessians played a more active role in a lot of the battles than regular British soldiers did.
Yeah. So I I may be wrong on this, but I'm pretty sure the Hessians were more of a northern campaign. Were
Yeah,
more
that's
heavily
right.
involved in the northern campaign, whereas the southern campaign, which I hate to say it, I actually love the British uniforms in the southern campaign. I think they look, because you just see this evolution of, you got the bear skins and everything else going into the war, and then by the time you get to the southern campaign,
Yep.
they're wearing flop hats.
Yep.
Sometime, they're taking the cocked hat and they're letting them down just like the long
Hmm.
hunters or anybody else does to keep that sun off.
Yeah, and
Um.
their uniforms go to more of a tropical weight. I think
Mm-hmm.
they called them coveralls, but it was basically leggings straight into pants, and it was
Yep.
more of like a linen material.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was pretty cool, and I think the jackets got shorter.
Yep. They did.
Yeah, and like you said, it was a really cool evolution of their uniform during that time period.
Yeah. Yep. Um. And of course, the American military really couldn't afford to evolve the uniform very, very, very much.
Dude, we were
Uh,
lucky to have shoes.
we were lucky to have shoes. Exactly. We were lucky
Yeah,
to have firearms in some cases, or powder.
that is a fact. I know a lot of like the militia units didn't really have arms.
Yeah. If they did, it would be um, their locally purchased firearms, which were generally Fowlers,
Yep.
smoothbore, basically shotguns.
Yep.
And again, the problem, that's another thing that I think is interesting, is the modern revisionist historian looks at the militia and they kind of scoff at them, and the British did too. They kind of scoff at them and they're like, well, as soon as you fix bayonets and charge into them, they're going to break. They'll always break. And they're like, well, that was because, they're cowards or whatever.
Yeah.
No, that's because the British have this thing called a bayonet.
Yeah.
Fowlers were not equipped with bayonets. I don't know if you've ever tried to fight a spear with a club,
Yeah.
but it's not going to end well.
Well,
Um,
the only time that Americans have perfected shotguns and bayonets was during World War One with the trench gun,
yep,
which
yep,
I mean that's essentially what a Fowler was a shotgun, like you
yep.
said. But yeah, didn't have bayonets for him at that time.
Uh-huh. And not only that, a lot of times the tactic would be, I know, again, I'm getting away from French and Indian War. I'll get back to it, but I got to kill this rabbit that's leading me on this trail, or else he's going to bug me to death.
You better get that Fowler.
Uh, yep, get the Fowler out. But another thing is, like, usually the British doctrine for dealing with militia that were fighting in linear combat was send in cavalry, generally heavy cavalry if you have them, or dragoons, or something like that, and they'll fall apart as soon as they see it coming. And again, that stems back to that whole bayonet thing,
Yep.
because if you don't have the bayonets, those horses will ride right through your lines, and they'll smash through. Basically, the way I described it once is, I don't know if you've ever heard of the kids game, Red Rover, Red Rover.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so just imagine that you've got a bunch of very small, kind of weaker children holding the line, and you send the most biggest, toughest, heaviest kid that's 6'4" into the middle of that line.
Yep.
They don't have something to protect themselves with. It's going to smash right through.
Another. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I'm just
So another aspect of battle that the Americans absolutely hated and feared was encirclement. So what the British would do, and
yep.
I'm pretty certain this is where we got it. I could be wrong, but the L shape, which I mean they weren't trying to ambush, but you know, anytime the Americans would start to get flanked, they would fold
Yeah.
because they did not want to get surrounded. Because
Yep.
the British obviously were not very nice to the captured Americans.
Yep.
So that was like, besides cavalry, that was like their biggest fear.
Yep.
Which
That brings up one. That brings up one of my. Oh yeah, that actually brings up one of my favorite tactics. I don't know if you've ever read into Francis Marion, the Swamp Fox.
I have read the book about him. Yes.
One of his favorite tactics, well, it wasn't necessarily a tactic, it was just a way of fighting, is he would say, never completely surround your enemy. He said, if you give him room to run, when the first sign of adversity comes along, he will take that opportunity every time.
Yep. Always provide him a way out.
Yep.
I thought that was so neat, and it's like you don't really hear that from a lot of tacticians.
Mm-hmm. And I think it was like, give him an opportunity to escape, and he'll take it every time as soon as adversity shows. But he's like, if you completely surround an enemy, he will fight you to the death.
Yeah, it's Sun Tzu talks about it in The Art of War. It's called Death's Drowned, and
yep.
We'll look at Rorke's Drift with during the Zulu War. I mean, those guys were completely surrounded, but they held out against all odds.
Yeah,
that was their death's ground, and they came out of it.
Yep. Yeah, but anyhow, I guess going back to our subject at hand, what do you want to talk about on it?
See how far you can get. I mean, we just wound up in the Zulu War.
Yep.
about the French and Indian War. So it's yeah. Okay, so I brought up a picture of the British uniforms. I should have done that when we were actually talking about uniforms. That would have been, more effective for the viewers. I will fire myself and get a better image person. Let's talk about some weapons that were used, and I'm sure I totally did not. I did not upload any musket images. That was very smart. But yeah, I'm gonna fire myself. But I did. I did incorporate or I did upload the Gunstock War Club, which was used by a lot of the northern tribes, really during the 18th century, and I think it even made itself out to the Plains natives, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep, and if I remember right, it makes a pretty prominent appearance in The Last of the Mohicans.
100%. Chingachgook.
Yep.
Yep, that man used it to great effect against Magua at the very end.
Yep.
And if I'm not mistaken, I think Cold Steel makes a reproduction of it. A
really
weird reproduction of it, but yeah. Garrett said, "Ethan, how dare you?" What? I'm really curious on what that's in reference to. You must have said something anti-French.
Oh no, Garrett's not really into the whole French thing. It was probably me saying that the British Southern Campaign uniforms look pretty cool.
Oh yeah, that probably is it. Yep, that makes sense. Yeah, they were kind of cool. They were pretty cool.
Yeah, pretty utilitarian.
There you go. Yeah, but
no, going back to weapons. So I think I kind of started to hit on this a little bit. So the British side, I'm not gonna lie, I've read quite a bit on the British land pattern muskets and the precursors. I did a video on it, and I've kind of all brain dumped it now.
Yeah.
But so basically, and I can't remember the exact because there's actually year models, but to put it into perspective for the British, you're going to see the main arm is going to be the longland pattern brown bess, or we call it, brown bess nowadays. Some soldiers would kind of refer to it as that, but the longland pattern musket. Back then, it was just called the land pattern musket because it wouldn't be until you got the short land pattern musket
Mm-hmm.
that they would, it's kind of like the SMLE.
Yeah.
What did you call the rifle before the SMLE? Well, it was just the MLE. It was the magazine Lee Enfield.
Yep.
And then a shorter version came around. And it was the short version.
Yep.
So same thing. The British like to do that for some reason. But yeah, so the long land pattern is the main British. It's the main British infantry musket. The pistols are mainly going to be, obviously on land is going to be the land pattern pistol. Wow, that's creative.
Yeah.
Or as a lot of people refer to them nowadays as the heavy dragoon, because later on you would get a lighter pistol made for the dragoons called the light dragoon.
Yeah.
And that's really kind of it as far as I know of. It was pretty bare bones for the British because they had a little better at this time. They had a little more standardized system
Yep.
than the French did. The French, like I said, you're going to see the 1717, the 17. No, you will not see the 1728. I take that back. That was not used very often. You'd see some very early ones, maybe, but most of those are on mainland Europe. So you're going to see 1717s, fusil de chasse, fusil de trait, fusil d'ordinaire, and the fusil fin occasionally, and those are all basically Fowlers of different style.
Mm-hmm.
For handguns, there are the 1733 models, and it's funny because they actually had standardized on a handgun that was more common in North America than their actual infantry musket. You have the 1733 cavalry model pistol,
Yeah.
which is brass. It's a big 60, I think it's a 65 caliber, big brass fitting gun.
Golly.
Yeah, that's mainly what you're going to see on land. And then anything that happens on the oceans, more 7 Years' War, you see the 1733 Tidal model, and that's TIDAL, as in the tide.
Okay.
Uh, and that is their naval pistol. We already kind of discussed artillery.
Yeah.
It was very few and far between, and they were generally pretty light.
I'd say most of the artillery is probably stationed at forts and things like that for defense.
Yes. Oh, that does bring me into another thing that played a very prominent role in the lieu of artillery, or the lack thereof, was the use of the rampart gun or the wall gun.
Yep.
The wall gun is going to be used a lot in the French and Indian War,
Yep.
namely because it's compact, it's fairly accurate at long ranges for not being a rifle. It's a demoralizing weapon. Anything over 100 caliber was the bare minimum for a rampart or a wall gun, and you could load a lot of shot into one of those things. Basically turning it into a giant shotgun.
Now, when you're talking
And
about wall gun, you're talking about like the gigantic
yes,
rifle or
uh,
musket, basically.
yep, they had
Not.
to be they were anywhere from basically 100 to 150 caliber.
Yeah. Like
It was
huge.
yep, they're crew served weapons. They weigh anything from like 37 to 60, 70 pounds,
Yep.
depending on the model. Um, and they are meant to be fired from a pintle mount.
Yep.
So you have a fixed swivel on the
Mm-hmm.
gun, just kind of like a swivel gun,
Yep.
but they could be fired with a crew of men. Generally two. One guy can actually hold it on his shoulder, the other guy can fire it off of his shoulder. Uh, that was not ideal because the recoil on these guns is massive. We're talking 375 grains of powder for the smallest wall gun.
Yeah.
And then you have a ton of shot, or, sometimes George Washington talks about wall guns being used in the American War of Independence as precision weapons for long range, because they really were a form of light artillery.
Yeah. I mean,
Uh,
that's yeah.
And, you know, the old doctrine was close range is melee combat. You know, the closest range is basically hand to hand. Past that, you go to the bayonet. Past that, you can go to pistols. Past that, you can go to carbines. Past that, muskets and rifles. And then furthest range effectiveness is the artillery. And the rifle actually kind of started to spell the end for the wall gun. And rifles were used in the French and Indian War. Matter of fact, I wish I would have brought the book down with me. I have a firsthand account of a British officer surprised at the fact that the natives at um, Braddock's defeat at the Battle of Monongahela had rifles.
Yeah.
And he would talk about, you know, you hear a musket being shot at you, and he's like, you just hear a loud boom. But he's like, when you hear that sound of that rifle, and the way he described it was the cutting through the air of a rifle round. He said you could always tell when you were being shot at by rifles, and he
Yep.
was like, it was terrifying.
Oh, I bet.
Which I think nowadays, looking back at it, I think what he was more or less hearing was the supersonic crack that the
Probably,
muskets
yeah.
just generally don't have.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so rifles are going to be there in a very, very limited number. Uh, Wall guns are going to be pretty common. As a matter of fact, another reference to the wall gun is by Robert Rogers. Uh,
Yes.
if you haven't read, I don't know if you've read his journal. Uh,
I
it's very good.
did. I did a while back. Garrett says he has a very important question for you. He said, "Is there a
Okay.
trick to getting this wood patch box off of your wood runner?"
Oh, yeah, you have to push up on the brass button. That's the
There.
best I can.
See.
That's the best I can explain it. Sometimes you got to push up on it pretty hard.
Okay. Solving problems over a live stream.
Oh yeah.
Um. So I put a picture up of Fort Loudon, which is in I think it's Loudon County, Tennessee, out sort of where I originate from.
Mhm.
Well, I say originate, um, lived at. Um, if I'm not mistaken, they had wall guns at that fort. This was another like frontier fort. It was
Yep.
uh, not a very coveted spot because it was out in the middle of nowhere, way out in East Tennessee, getting close to Middle Tennessee,
Yep.
and I know there was an account of a swivel gun that was there, and they talked about the lifespan of it before it would blow up. Uh, Somehow they miscalculated the lifespan, and it blew up. And I think it killed one
Yeah.
soldier and injured a few others. Now,
Yep.
keep in mind this was a British-made swivel gun. It was not made in India or anything like that, so it wasn't
Mhm.
prone to exploding. Um, but yeah, it just kind of like shows you that artillery pieces and things like that did have a lifespan,
Yep.
which is kind of neat.
Actually, even muskets technically had a lifespan, and it was a very generous lifespan. I read about French accounts of the testings they do, and the reason they phased out like the 1766, what people call the Charleville, and I
Yeah.
mean that's the one model I kind of give it a pass because it was actually developed at Charleville and was mainly made at Charleville. But the 1766 they did a test, and I don't have my book down here with me right now, but I believe it was somewhere upwards of like 25,000 rounds, and the gun finally gave.
That's quite a bit.
Um, that's a lot of rounds, and that's what I was. Or no, not 25,000. Excuse me, 2,500 rounds. And they had deemed that it was because it was too thin at the breech, and so they would, with the model 1770, they would thicken it up at the breech, and well, really they thickened the whole barrel out. Um, and that's why it's kind of like some of those old guns. It's not necessarily because they are, but it's not because they're old. It's
Yeah.
because you don't know how many times it's been fired and how many times that steel, or excuse me, iron has been stressed. That I generally,
Mm-hmm.
with an original, I will still shoot them, but I shoot them with a lot lighter loads.
Yeah.
Except for that 1777, because I know that's actually like that gun was not used very often that I have waiting for me at home.
Yeah.
And
I mean that's a
it's
lot. That's a
top tier
lot.
quality.
Yeah, and that's a lot of rounds to put through a muzzleloader.
Yep. That is a lot of rounds. And that was what I was laughing whenever I was reading that, because I was like, huh, my Indian made musket has taken the same exact loads that those guns did, and it's made more than they did.
Yeah.
So it's actually outperformed the originals.
So you said about 1,000. What was it? How many rounds was the
2,500, I believe.
25? I don't
I
even
don't
know
have,
if I've put 2,500 rounds through my Mosin Nagant.
yeah. Well, then,
Yeah.
then like the 1770s and the 74 and, all those different variations, they are even bumped up higher. I think the 77, the originals, the older ones, not the Revolutionary era ones or the AN9s,
Yeah.
were rated at somewhere in the 20, 30,000 range. Not sure off the top of my head, but somewhere in there.
That is a lot. Yeah. That's
Yeah.
and that's something that people don't really think about. You know, I never thought about them having a lifespan until you had mentioned it once when we were
Yep.
talking. And I was like, wow, that's actually
In
pretty cool.
the British military, they did theirs not necessarily by rounds, but by years.
Yeah.
And in the British military, the average musket had a 12-year lifespan, and that was whenever it was deemed it either A, needed to go back for refurbishment, or B, it would be replaced. And fun fact, a lot of the reason why the the Mexicans at the Alamo, and San Jacinto
Mm-hmm.
are using brown besses, Hadgets, Bakers, things like that, is because those guns had A, percussion caps, and B, those guns had already made past their 12-year lifespan. So
Yeah.
they're using guns that are 3 times past their lifespan, and they're still working.
Yeah. Uh,
But
the British were notorious for giving like their colonies outdated weapons or
yep,
selling them off. Like I know in India it was a big practice. So like when they switched to the what was it like the Lee Metford or whatever was after the Martini Henry, then
yep,
they started issuing like the Indian troops Martini Henrys, while the soldiers
yep,
had the Lee Metfords and the Lee Enfields. Always had to stay a step ahead,
yep,
so if there was a rebellion, they would be
yep.
outclassed.
I believe it was because Nepalese weapons. I always find those interesting.
Yeah,
I think their theory was they wanted two major basically two models in between them and what they gave the Gurkhas,
yeah, that makes sense.
or the Nepalese. Hence why we have the Gahindra Martini Henry,
Yep.
which is different than a standard Martini Henry. But it was because one of the guys there from Nepal went and bought one in England, took it back to Nepal, and they reverse engineered it. And then they kept some things off of the Peabody and put them on there. But yeah, it's just like you said, they wanted to stay basically two weapon systems behind. So at the time, their British are using Martini Henry, and the Nepalese are using Brunswick.
Yeah,
Um,
it's pretty interesting. Like I should have got a Gahindra. That would have been a neat experiment.
yeah, and the French and the Belgians, they did the same thing with their colonies. Matter of fact, I came very close to bidding on what was advertised as a French wall gun, and then I
Hmm.
got to reading into. I actually went and read my book on it, and what it was is actually a French colonist wall gun, and
Interesting.
it is a carbon copy of an AN9 musket like I've got back there at home,
Yep.
but it's 125 caliber,
Jeez.
and it was made in the 1890s.
Is it flintlock or percussion?
It's a flintlock
Flintlock. Wow.
because it's going back to that thing of not wanting your colonies being armed as good as
Yep.
you are.
Yep. Wow. Interesting. That'd be pretty cool to see. Um,
Yeah,
I definitely look forward to seeing your wall gun video. That's going to be pretty impressive.
yeah. It'll be a couple of years, but it'll be out eventually.
Yeah, I feel you on that one. Um, Let's see. What other talking points do we have for the French and Indian War? Um, we talked about
Let's.
uniforms. We talked
Yep.
about tactics. We sort of talked about forts. We talked
Yep.
about artillery, which goes into weapons. Natives. The start. How it was a world war.
Hmm.
I guess we can go into the movie if you wanted, unless you've got another topic that you want to touch on.
No, no, that's fine. This kind of will cross over between what we were talking about forts in the
Yeah.
movie, and that is their portrayal of the Battle of Fort William Henry.
Yeah.
Pretty good, actually, really good for the most part.
Yeah.
They got down that Montcalm is digging trenches to get closer to the fort itself,
Mm-hmm.
so he's not falling under fire. And you've been studying medieval history. How many times have you heard about that in medieval history?
Oh yeah.
Happened quite a bit.
Quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And it
So,
also displayed what was it? Displayed his sappers and things like that. So
yep,
yeah, it was pretty interesting. And then I also like how, which it was the British that were using it, but it was the Grenadier flintlock, the grenade musket.
yep.
I thought that was really neat. I don't think I've ever seen that in another movie before.
Now, the one thing they did get wrong, and I may be wrong on how I remember this, but if I remember right, when they load the mortars, they light the fuse and then light the main charge.
Yeah, I thought that was like I
Yeah,
didn't think you were supposed to. I mean, I'm not like an artilleryman, but I thought that when the cannon uh,
goes
shot,
off that.
it ignited that
Yep,
fuse because
yep.
I thought they loaded the fuse backwards towards the bottom.
No, so what they would do is they would take the fuse and it would be. I actually have. I was looking at a manual on it the other day. It was cocked off to a certain angle, and it was
Mm-hmm.
in front. It was in front of the what they called common shell. Uh, it was in the front, and the escaping gases that would escape from around the ball as it's being pushed out of the barrel from the main charge would actually light the fuse.
Well,
Um,
I guess that's why you get some that are dug up that are unexploded because maybe they
yep.
didn't catch.
Sometimes they wouldn't go off.
Yeah.
Uh, but so another thing about the Fort William Henry thing is the theory of using silk for patching material to give you an extra quote 40 yards on your rifle.
Oh yeah. What's your
Um,
opinion on that?
so I tried that out.
Mm-hmm.
I went and bought real silk, 100% real silk. I spent a pretty good piece of money
Oh yeah,
on
it's
some
not
real
cheap.
silk, and I made a video on it.
Yep.
And what I found out is you would be better off just dropping the ball down the barrel with no patching at all, because at least that would be faster. Because your accuracy with silk it's terrible. Because what happens is a silk, if you ever try to, fake silk, you try to light it up and it exposes to heat and it
Yep.
melts,
Yep.
which that would actually have been worse than what it actually does.
They would have gummed up
When
your
you,
barrel.
yeah, what happens when you touch real silk with a little bit of heat is that stuff just disappears, like it vaporizes.
Yeah.
So what I found is that I was loading and I tried different loads trying to get it to work. I couldn't get it to work. My groups were awful. And what I found was I was finding pieces of patching material, pieces of silk, and that has a hole burned through it, which is usually a sign of overpressure. But in this
Mm-hmm.
case, I actually took a ball and wrapped it up in the silk and just barely touched it with a lighter underneath, and the ball just fell right out of the bottom.
Yeah.
So, yeah, silk being used for patching material, that's not a thing.
So
uh,
for patching material, from what I have researched and experimented with, is if you take raw buckskin,
buckskin's pretty good.
can completely cover your ball,
Yep.
the entire way, and then sew it at the top, so it's completely encased in that buckskin. I have had great results out of that.
Okay.
I wish I had done a video on that, but
Yep.
from what I understand, that was sort of uh, the best ammunition type that especially riflemen could use during the 18th
Okay.
century. They got
So,
very good results from that, and
mm-hmm.
I did too from the best.
So did you know? Oh, and you were doing that in the Brown Bess?
Yeah, because I didn't have
Okay.
a rifle at the time.
So the British military actually experimented, and I say experimented, they actually fielded them,
Mm-hmm.
sewn round ball. They were, and I think they used something fine like horsehair so it could actually break apart
Yeah.
when fired. But British muzzleloaders actually did a video on it, and he had trouble out of the Baker. Now it's probably different, and he wasn't using buckskin.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that when the British went to the Brunswick rifle and they wanted a self-contained patched ball, they actually would dip the ball into a hardening agent so it would actually harden to it, not necessarily sewing it in, because what British muzzleloaders found out and the British military found out was for some reason the patch wouldn't come loose from the ball and it would go down range like that, and that would mess with your rifling or your twist rate and everything else and kind of throw it off. But now a smoothbore musket, I can kind of see that.
Yeah.
I actually can see that, and I kind of need to try it now.
Well, so I was using cotton thread. Maybe that
Mm-hmm.
had an impact on it separating. I don't know.
Yeah, might have burnt,
That's
or
what.
kind of.
Yeah. So I kind of want to try that again. I need a flintlock.
Yep.
Yeah, this is a problem. Yeah, I think this needs to be tested and revisited.
Yep. Yep.
um,
But yeah, so the whole silk thing, that's a myth.
yeah, I just
Um,
never like. Yeah, I was like, that just doesn't seem possible.
I kind of thought it was going into it, but I've been pleasantly surprised by things in movies that actually did work before.
Yeah, you never know.
Um, uh, Actually, namely, there's kind of a controversy about it, but the sharp spit tap loading. I found that if you're a poorly trained troop that doesn't know the drill very well, and that is your only option,
Yeah,
yeah, it's actually pretty effective.
just
I
dropping
can
the
actually
ball
load.
in.
Yep, just biting the ball off of the end of the paper cartridge, priming, pouring the powder, and then dropping the ball down the barrel.
Mm-hmm.
Not necessarily spitting it, but dropping it down the barrel. I'm generally about I can reload and fire in 9 seconds that away, and
That's
hit a 150-yard man-sized steel silhouette pretty regularly with quite a bit of oomph still.
that's pretty good. That's really good. I know it's probably the same thing for the like the tap method, basically of
Yep,
just
tap
dropping it in
shooting.
there, tapping it, shooting.
Now, is it ideal? No, because and I thought it was funny on Sharp when they mentioned it. He's like, just don't point your barrel down or it'll roll out the barrel. He's like, but you don't
Yeah,
have to worry about that because the Frenchman's going to be on a horse. And I'm like, really? So you're never going to have to shoot downhill.
no, never. It's always uphill.
And they're always going to be cavalry you're facing against, So
Yep.
I always thought that was kind of funny. But no, I mean, if you are facing uphill, it can work.
Yeah.
It's just not technically ideal.
No.
Okay, going back to Fort William Henry. Let's
So
see here.
Garrett had a pretty good comment on the leather. He said, "I believe the actual quote on that was a piece of old saddle. Nothing drives so fierce, and what they're referring to there is actually leather or buckskin." I
Yep.
take Garrett's word for that as gospel. So, yeah.
Yep.
Makes sense.
But going back to Fort William Henry, you have I cannot not think. I've been having this trouble here lately. I have a name on the tip of my tongue, and then I just completely forget it, and then it comes up to me like 4 hours later.
Yeah.
I cannot remember the name of the British officer in charge, but I do know the Frenchman. It was Montcalm.
Yeah, and now I can't remember the British guy either.
Yep. But the treaty they do there, or the surrender, they nailed it. That really well.
Yeah.
For it is because if you were to show it in a movie, nobody would watch it because it was just brutal. Was the massacre of the mass happened after the Battle of Fort William Henry.
Yeah, I think they tried to depict it.
And okay, so that is one thing. Yeah, so that is one thing I'm definitely going to knock on the last Mohicans is they show Montcalm sitting there and he's like conspiring with the Huron.
Connection's breaking up again.
British, settlers and soldiers. You hear me?
Yeah, well, it's breaking up again. Are you there?
I'm going to move closer to.
Hang on. Yeah, it sounds like he's moving back to a better connected spot.
I think I can hear you.
Yeah, I can. All right, you sound better.
Okay, yeah, I'm going to walk closer. This Wi-Fi sometimes goes in and out.
I gotcha. Yeah.
But no, Montcalm in the movie they show him as the conspirator who planned the massacre.
Yep.
In real life, depending on the source, he was either A, oblivious to it, didn't know it was going on, or B, he was actually trying to stop it.
Yeah.
But basically, the massacre is depicted in the movie. And I'm trying to remember. It's been a while since I've watched it. I don't know if you watched it here recently.
Oh yeah, this is one of those movies that I can watch a million times. It's like Braveheart.
Yep. So describe how the movie portrays the massacre.
So essentially, they leave the fort and the premises. Like as soon as they get to the wood line, they get ambushed on both sides, and that's what we see in the background here is that ambush.
Okay.
Which, yeah, from my understanding, Montcalm was completely against it and did not support it, and potentially
Yep.
may not have even known that it was in the works.
Yep. So in the movie, they show a lot of firearms.
Yes.
Correct.
Yep.
A lot of shooting.
Yep.
So in real life, in the real story, the part of the surrender was the fact that the British had to turn in their weapons.
Yeah.
And they did. And so the Huron, or just all the tribes that were there fighting with the French, didn't really have to shoot.
Yeah.
So what happened is as the settlers were walking away, some of the natives were not very happy because they wanted their spoils of war.
Yep.
And they started going and looting whatever they would, they'd run up and they'd grab something from one settler, they'd grab something from another one, and then they would start grabbing more and more and more. And then some people started trying to, kind of pushing back. And then it was all nothing but knives, tomahawks, hammers, and just a brutal massacre. Come in on all sides, and yeah, they hacked them up, beat them up. It was brutal. The firsthand accounts of that massacre are hard to listen to or read about.
Yeah.
But yeah, there really wasn't a whole lot of gunfire going on because why do you need to shoot? They're not going to shoot back. They're completely unarmed. Just go in there and take what you want. And yeah, and that really was part of the thing that led to the downfall of French and native. How do you put this?
Like relations.
Relations. Yep, that's the word I'm looking for.
Yeah.
Montcalm was horrified at it, and yeah, it just really kind of fell apart from there.
Yeah.
Because the at that point the French just viewed the Indians as complete and utter savages who were uncontrollable. And the Indians viewed the French as people going back on their word because they were promised all these the spoils of war, and they were not allowed to have them.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's my take on that.
Yeah, sorry, I was trying to think of who the general's name was. It is really bugging me.
Yeah.
And all I can think of is gray hair from the last of the
Yep.
Mohicans. Man, I can't remember what his name was.
I don't know either,
I don't
off
know,
the top of my head.
but yeah. No, it's with powder and ball being as expensive or scarce to the natives as it was, that would definitely not be something that they'd be wasting their time on when they could easily hack them apart.
Yep. And they didn't discriminate here. Women, children, babies, everybody got it.
Yep. Yeah, everything was fair game.
Yep.
So here's something that's interesting, at least as what I've read for the Cherokee, since that's what was mainly in my area of East Tennessee, Western North Carolina,
Mm-hmm.
Northeast South, yeah. And it talks about whenever the Cherokee would, when they would get trophies of war, spoils of war, they didn't really wear them. It was more along the lines of they would take it, hang it on a pole in the center of their village, and
It's like counting coup.
yeah, which that's something we should get into here in a second is counting coup.
Oh, I don't know if I don't know if I know enough about it to actually get into it too deep.
Okay,
I might be wrong.
I can touch on it a
I'll
little
let
bit.
you know.
Okay, so for whenever they would take things, a lot of the depictions is like they would take a jacket from like a British officer or whatever because they liked the red color. It
Yep.
didn't really happen that way. They might
Yep.
take it, but they would hang it on a pole. It was like the war pole in the center of their village, and they paint it red. They were obsessed with the color red. I don't want to say obsessed, but it was like
Mm-hmm.
an important one to them. And
Huh. What an
yeah,
unfortunate color for the British Army.
yeah, it definitely was. Especially when they kind of turned their backs on the Cherokee.
Yep.
And so, yeah, like the gorgets and things like that, they'd hang up there. Now, counting coup,
Yeah.
that was very common for the native tribes to do against each other, more so than actual like physical combat.
Okay.
Now, coup could be you see it a lot in like the Plains natives where um, they run up and they club somebody and then they run back to the line. Counting
Yep.
coup could have been something as simple as running and touching an opponent and then getting back to your line.
Uh-huh.
And it was considered more of an act of bravery because you're running out there and you're not doing physical harm to your enemy. You're just taunting him and then you're going back.
Yeah.
Um,
Yes. See, that's what I have heard.
yeah.
And when you said getting into counting coup, I was like, oh boy, here it comes, and it'd be like, yeah, so that actually never happened. And I was gonna be like, oh.
Yeah. No, it was a big thing among the tribes, and from what I understand, a lot of the tribes partook in it, and depending on, I guess, what the conflict was, dictated like how severe the counting coup would be, or that individual.
Yeah.
They could just want to humiliate their enemy and just run up and
Yep.
poke him, and come back.
Yep.
You'll see a lot of times the handprint on some of the tribes.
Yeah.
I think the Cherokee used it quite a bit, and that was sort of like the number of handprints was how many times you've countered coup in battle.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you saw, so even like the war paint colors had different meanings. Red was sort of like the base layer. Blue, I don't think blue was used too often, although it was common. I don't think it was really used for warfare. Green was used. That was more for a night attack, which I find interesting because night vision is in green.
Mm-hmm.
Yellow was basically if you're terminally ill and you know that you're probably not going to survive battle, they would cover themselves in yellow or like a large portion of their body, and
Mm-hmm.
you did not want to be on the opposing end of that person because that person didn't
They
care
ain't got
about.
nothing to lose.
They've got nothing to lose. And then black is very common as well, which that could have been made easily from charcoal.
Yep.
And that's where you really start to see the real crazy designs and like I mean, they're scary looking.
Yeah, the idea of running across a fella all painted in black all by yourself out in the middle of nowhere,
Yep.
and you know he probably wants to kill you. Yeah, that to me was always pretty terrifying.
Yep. 100%. That would that would scare the daylights out of me.
I almost thought it's almost like the black paint was almost kind of like how put this, a psychological thing, you know,
Oh, 100%.
to terrify your enemy.
Yeah. Uh, oh man, it had to have been terrifying. Yeah. Um, but yeah, that's kind of that. The warfare of the natives was pretty brutal.
Yep.
But it was very effective.
Uh, yeah, one of you talking about just sheer brutality on the American frontier. One of the passages from Robert Rogers' journal talks about not necessarily the French and Indian War, but a instance that happened in the War of Austrian Secession, or as we call it here, King George's War.
Yeah.
And it was particularly, like, without going into details, they had captured a young woman who had a baby, and they, you know, she was a Christian, and so they talk about it carved, just kind of as a mockery, it carved a cross into the baby's forehead. And then of course the baby wouldn't stop crying, so they put hot coals in his mouth. Like, yeah, just some really brutal stuff happened.
I can't
And
imagine.
I don't think people realize just how brutal.
No, like, do you imagine the PTSD level on like old warfare and stuff like that? I mean, it's just got to be like out
Yep.
the roof.
Yep.
And
It's
that's
pretty rough.
yeah. Um, yeah. Oh man, that took a dark turn.
Oh yeah.
But I mean, that was a reality of the frontier. I mean, it was a very
Yep.
brutal area. Let's see, what was it? David Crockett, his if I'm not mistaken, his parents when they lived, because they're from pretty close to where I used to live there in Tennessee. Um, I think it was around the Rogersville area. Uh, if I'm not mistaken, it was his grandparents, and they were massacred in a raid. And
Yep.
yeah, then his parents moved to Limestone, Tennessee. But yeah, sorry
Have to
that
have old Garrett chime in on that one. He's pretty well read in old Davy.
is he. So
Oh yeah.
I hate to do like a shameless plug, but the birthplace of David Crockett is they're trying to build a new cabin, and I was gonna do like a video on it, but I didn't know Garrett was a David Crockett fan, so we'll have to get together and try to put something together. But yeah, the state park's trying to rebuild um, their family cabin that David was born in, and it's gonna have original
Yeah.
pieces of the original cabin in it. So that's right, because you guys did a video on the David Crockett birthplace, didn't you? You there? Hello? Did I lose you again? You started talking about David Crockett and you vanished.
Oh, there you are. I
Okay.
lost you for a second there.
Yep.
This Wi-Fi's acting up. I got to go back inside and put my phone back on the charger.
Okay. Well, we can cut it off whenever if we need to.
Oh, we
But
can keep going.
okay. But yeah, I forgot that y'all did a video of the birthplace out there.
Yeah.
Pretty
Yeah.
cool.
Garrett went out there.
Yeah.
I was in parts unknown at that time.
Yeah.
uh, but yeah. So let's see here. Going back to, what do you
Let's
think of the
see.
weapons that were used on the movie?
Well,
I'll give
so
you my opinion after you give me yours.
okay, so I was really impressed. So Daniel Day Lewis is like a really good actor. from what I understand, he's like a method
Yeah,
actor. His marksmanship skills in that movie are phenomenal. I've, I
yeah.
mean, you've shot flintlocks for a long time. I've shot them. I know Garrett probably has. Um, I don't.
I
I
mean, to be
shouldn't say
fair, I think
prob.
you've actually shot flintlocks longer than I have.
Well, um, I like to think I'm a really good shot, but for him to train to the level of where he can take two rifled flintlocks and shoot them at the same time and hit both targets on opposite ends of like a cliff is amazing.
Pretty spectacular.
It's very spectacular.
I'm
And
I'm trying to think how far away were they roughly.
I would say 25 to 50 yards.
Oh, that's doable. That's actually fairly doable.
But it's from the
There,
hip.
yeah, and the reason I say that is I've with a smoothbore musket, mind you, not
Hmm.
necessarily a rifle. I have fired from the hip, and you'd be surprised against a man-sized target how easy it is to hit something from the hip at about that distance, 25 meters roughly, with a smoothbore just by pointing from the hip. So yeah, I actually kind of see that.
All
Now,
right.
what might not have helped him out too much is the fact that he was loading while he was running, and I didn't see him put a patch on them balls, so it's just a loose ball rattled around in the barrel with rifling.
Yeah.
Smoothbore, that'd be okay. Rifling, not so much.
Yeah. He definitely. Yeah. But I said all that sarcastically. But yeah, he. Um, for the weapons, overall, I feel like they did fairly well. A lot of the night, whoever did the native costuming did a fantastic job. I think I can speak more on that
Yeah,
versus like the French or the British muskets. I assume the British are using longland pattern, but like for instance, the knives that the natives are using. So they have usually each native is having like two different knives. One is a fighting knife, the other one is a scalping knife. Um, Scalping knives had like an octagonal handle to it. It was very short, um, and so you kind of see that when they do their scalping, and then they take their fighting knife out or their tomahawk. The tomahawks I thought were really good. Um, they were not the throwing type; they were more along the lines of the actual fighting hawks. Um, you didn't see the pipe tomahawks or anything like that, but you saw that eastern woodland native style. The beadwork was amazing um, on like the knife sheaths and things like that. And yeah, whoever did the which I forget who they did the costuming for that, but yeah, they did a great job on that in my opinion. You there? Nope, I think we lost him again. Rock McLaughlin, it's glad you chimed in or tuned in for so long. That really appreciate you watching. So take it easy. And Garrett, oh
hello.
yeah, hello.
Yeah, you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. Uh, so trying to get my headphones to work again here
Okay, you have to
because
plug your
that's
phone.
what went out on me this time.
Ah, gotcha.
But the one thing that really stuck out to me was the style of rifle that uh, Daniel Day-Lewis uses.
Okay.
Because it's a later style. If you look at hello,
Yep, I can hear you.
okay,
It's
yeah.
kind of cutting in
So
and out.
yeah, that was because I was rehooking my headphones back up. But
Ah, gotcha.
uh, so he uses a quite later style. Like you, when you look at the progression of the American long rifle, uh, his is, and Garrett was actually the one that pointed this out to me quite a while ago. His is quite a almost like a turn of the century, like 1800 style. Now that's not taking anything away from the movie really, unless you're kind of like me and a nerd on these things. But
Yeah.
so there was that, and I can't for the life of me remember what the French troops were using on the movie. I actually was just trying to. That's probably what caused me to cut out there. I was trying to find a picture of what they were using. I couldn't even find a really good picture. But yeah, so there was that. But yeah, I do remember them using longland patterns, and they got them from Military Heritage, if I remember right. So they're Indian-made muskets, the old Bombay pipe bombs.
No way, and they
And
didn't blow up?
yeah, imagine that. Imagine
God.
that. No, no, you saw that scene at Fort William Henry whenever what you thought was common shell blowing up inside the fort and big fireballs. No, that was actually all the Indian-made muskets blowing up.
That's what it was,
So,
yeah.
uh, but yeah, that was just kind of one thing that I saw. Other than that, it was all pretty good, I thought.
Yeah, I thought it was too. Um,
I
Garrett,
mean, even that's just nitpicking.
yeah, and I mean, you had to go like pretty far into the weeds to find that. Like
Yep.
Garrett brought up a good point of a few too many dragoons um, at the massacre, which makes a lot of sense because there was a lot of like I know there's a couple where some I guess they're either NCOs or sergeant or officers are shooting their pistols at the natives. I think
Yeah, they wouldn't
Cora
have
has one. Yeah,
they wouldn't have had weapons. Like I said, it's been a long time since I've seen it, so I actually have to kind of have you reference
yeah,
some things for me.
yeah,
Um, but yeah, they wouldn't have even had. That is actually probably my because I remember I had a big problem with that scene, and I couldn't for the life of me really remember what it was, and I think that was actually it. Is like they actually were completely disarmed, and yeah, it just turned into a bloodbath.
yeah.
um,
Really,
so
really cool scene, but not historically accurate. I didn't even
yeah,
think about the pistols, but that makes sense because it seems like everybody's running around with a pistol in that scene.
and if you actually have handled 18th century, even originals, the 18th century style of pistols,
Yeah,
you realize they were not meant for. There's a reason why they were generally meant for people on horseback because they were meant to be fired at pretty much point blank range, like
yeah,
maybe just basically outside of bayonet and pike range.
yeah. They had their own holster like on the saddle, wasn't it?
Yep, the bucket holster.
Yeah, that's right.
That's what I refer to them as. Basically, just look like big buckets that hang off of the saddle up there up front. That was a pretty common thing. I think the Ottomans were even still using that style clear up into the 1890s.
Oh wow.
Uh, yeah, namely on the Russians used it. I think they used it on their Remington rolling block pistols.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, that was actually that was the like basically the number one style of carrying a pistol, especially as they called them horse pistols
Yeah.
back in the 18th century.
Okay.
So um, yeah, because if you ever handle like even the originals, they are. It's not so much that they're unwieldy; it's the fact, and it's not even that they're inaccurate. It's the fact they have no sights on them, and
Well, and that's a good point. Yeah.
you're holding a pistol that has no sights, so you can't aim, so you're just pointing. It's a weird angle, and because the grip angle's weird, and
Yeah.
it was definitely meant for not for precision shooting. Now there were some that were built for more precise shooting. They even have some. The French on their 1733 models had a front sight, whereas the British had nothing. It was just a smooth barrel all the way
Yeah.
across the top.
Well, and that's
Um,
like even for like ship fight, naval warfare. I mean, a lot of them, the boarding
very
parties
close.
would have them, but it's extremely close. Yeah, I mean, you're talking like feet away from people.
I think there was a reference Captain Ball made in it was talking about the 30 Years' War, so wheel lock pistols, but
Hmm.
kind of the same thing, smooth bore, no sights, and the I can't remember. I think it was no, I can't remember who it was who had said it, but they said your best range for a pistol is no further than the flame that comes out of the end of the barrel.
Wow. That's
So
yeah.
yeah, so about 6 feet, 5 or 6 feet.
So probably about the most accurate um, depiction during that ambush or the massacre scene is when the native jumps on the back of the horse of the general and he shoots him in his stomach, basically.
Okay.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
probably
Yeah.
probably the most accurate use of the pistol in the film. Then,
Oh yeah, I did it with a pistol. Yeah,
yep,
that's how you'd use one. That would
yeah,
be a pretty good use for it because you don't have to rear back and swing like you do with a tomahawk or
yep,
you know pull back and all you got to do is put it there and pull trigger.
yeah. That's what he did.
Yep. So another interesting thing, one of my favorite quotes. Well, not necessarily my favorite quotes, but one that entertained me the most, talking about Montcalm. Uh, After the Battle of Fort William Henry, and I think I actually told you about this when we were talking the other night. After the war really started kind of turning tides. Montcalm had written to the king and had asked him for reinforcements, more weapons, and more powder. And the king's response, I kind of find it hilarious because most people here in America don't realize there's wars going on all over the world at this point, especially in
Yep,
Europe. And the king's response is, "Why would I send men to go put out a fire in the barn whenever the house is on fire?"
yeah,
Referencing to the fact that he's losing or he's having a terrible time in mainland Europe, the homeland of France.
yep,
Why is he going to send people to the backwater of North America, several thousand miles away?
yeah. I mean,
Um,
it sucks, but they could afford to lose territory in North America.
yeah,
A lot more is at stake when you're losing territory in Europe at that time.
yeah, yep. And that's literally, is like you said, that's the home base.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yep.
it doesn't really make sense to do that. So that was, in the end, that was basically what caused the French to lose here in North America, was the fact that pressure was put on them back on the home front,
Yep.
and vice versa. They'd already sent a lot of supplies and men and stuff here in North America, so that's men and supplies that are not fighting on the home front.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Man, what an interesting time period.
Oh yeah, it was interesting. All right, that's the
Yeah.
one thing I got to say about the War of Independence, or the Revolutionary War. It was brutal, but at least it wasn't as brutal as the French and Indian War or King George's War.
I'm not too familiar with King George's War, but the French and Indian War definitely. Yeah, that was.
I read about King George's War, the War of Austrian Secession, years ago, and I would have to brush up on it again really, really well in order to give a fairly decent conversation about it. But
Yeah.
uh, that was actually where Robert Rogers actually was first getting involved into things like that.
Oh, really?
Uh, hmm
Hmm.
Fun fact: one of Robert Rogers' best friends growing up was a guy by the name of John Stark. Do you know who John Stark is?
I feel like I should know this name, and I feel like when you explain it, I'm gonna feel like a dummy.
So he was one of the leading individuals at the Battle of Bennington on the American side, whereas Rogers was on the British side during the War of Independence. And so yeah, they were on separate sides of the thing. Both of them had to run the gauntlet before in their younger years.
Yeah.
And Rogers talks about how he was like, yeah, John Stark, he's like, he actually ran it well. He's like, he ran it a lot better than I did.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah,
Interesting. You know what's interesting also is how the Rangers, like the modern Rangers, right, the U.S. Army Rangers,
uh,
take their lineage from Rogers Rangers, who actually fought for the Queen.
mm, yep. I find that hilarious because they're like, Robert Rogers, the founder of the Rangers. And I'm like,
The Queen's
yes,
Rangers.
the Queen's Rangers. I'm like,
Yeah.
you don't realize they weren't on our side.
Yeah, I was like,
Robert Rogers never fought for the United States.
yeah, I kind of thought that was
Um,
interesting. Like, cool lineage, like cool tie-in, but it's
yeah,
like part of me is like, it's
yeah,
like air defense artillery takes their lineage from coastal artillery, and I was like, that doesn't make sense. Like,
Yeah,
coast
infantry, we just take our lineage from
infantry.
ancient times.
Yeah, you fight on foot.
It's just, you always have to have infantry.
Yeah,
Yep.
but
Um, but no, you mentioned that, and I started chuckling to myself because I was like, I know where this is going
yeah,
because I've had the same thoughts.
yep. Okay, I'm glad I'm
Uh,
not the only one. It's
not
just,
he,
yeah.
Now he actually did offer to fight for the United States. I don't know if you knew that
No, I didn't know.
at the beginning of the war.
Hmm.
So he had offered, and he had just come back from a trip to England, and George Washington personally said, "No, you are not joining this army," because he's like, I guarantee, he's like, you just came back from England. He's like, you're a spy.
It's a valid.
And there might have been merit to that.
Yeah.
There's probably good merit to that. But according to Robert Rogers, he was like, he wasn't a spy, is what he claimed, and it made him so mad that he ended up fighting for the British because he hated Washington so bad.
Well, it kind
But
of.
yeah, him going and joining the British didn't solidify his case any on not being a spy.
Yeah, and I could see the hesitation from Washington because the kinds of
Mm-hmm.
missions that Rogers would have had to have done would have been very secret in nature, and he would have been
Yep.
privy to a lot of information that did not need to get into the wrong hands.
Yep. Yep. Um. Yep.
But then you
And
got,
yeah, then Rogers ended up losing out the Queen's Rangers to Simcoe.
hmm,
Um, and then he ended up dying basically in a gutter in London, drunk.
really,
Yeah, it wasn't a very pretty ending for him.
hmm,
Yeah, he basically drank himself to death in London.
wow,
Um, yeah, so yeah, that's that.
hmm.
That's Robert Rogers in a nutshell.
Well, that's interesting. I didn't know like the end of his life or anything like that. I mean, I know he had a really like successful military career for the French and Indian War, but I never really researched him beyond that.
Yep, French and Indian War. Yep, French and Indian War, extremely successful. War of Independence, not so much. And then yeah, after the War of Independence, it was all downhill from there.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, trying to think of some other characters, but I'm kind of drawing a blank.
Yeah, I'm kind of drawing a blank on the rest of like the French and Indian War characters, but yeah.
Yeah. Um, yeah, basically the Battle of the Plains of Abraham happens, which is the one time they actually get online and actually do. Not, I say the one time. I'm sure there were several times, but the one big time, scaling the heights of Abraham. That's always a cool. There's actually, I think I sent some of you some of those paintings to you. I
Yep.
like those paintings because they depict on how steep of a climb that was.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, they end up catching the French off guard at the Plains of Abraham because they scaled the heights and engaged them in linear warfare, and the Highlanders actually really made a name for themselves at that battle. Uh, and yeah, beat them there, and
Yeah.
that pretty much sealed the deal.
It's pretty neat how the British did use the Highlanders to great success on the North American continent in both wars. Um, and it's also kind of interesting how in that East Tennessee, Western North Carolina area, a lot of the Scotch Irish wound up settling there after the war. So I guess it was kind
Hmm
of footing for them being in the
I
mountains and stuff
always
like
find
that.
yep, I always find it interesting how the Highlanders, because you have the Battle of Culloden Moor,
Mm-hmm.
which it's not, that wasn't, there's a big misconception that was just the Highlanders versus the British, and when in all reality it was the Jacobites versus the um the British government. But the Jacobites weren't just Highlanders; they were Highlanders, Lowlanders, Irish, and even some English,
Hmm.
trying to restore the Stuarts. And I thought it was funny how a lot of those guys though that were Jacobites and hated the British government so bad, uh, ended up going and fighting for them. And I'm not talking about very long afterwards.
Yeah, I
I'm
guess I
talking
wouldn't have
about
known.
well, let's see here. Plains of Abraham. Drawing a blank. Battle of Culloden Moor happens in 45,
Yeah.
and then it's the late 17. Hold on a second. I'm gonna have to look it up because it's gonna bug me. Uh, the Plains of Abraham happened. One second. Wind up here. 1759. That's kind of what I was expecting. So 1759. So from 45 to 59, you got
Mm,
14 years.
yeah.
14 years difference.
Yep.
And I was really surprised whenever I found out that a lot of the Jacobites fought for the British in the American War of Independence. Uh,
I would not have suspected
n-
that.
namely the woman who, and I can't remember her name, the woman who spirited away Bonnie Prince Charlie, you know, over to the Isle of Skye.
Yeah. Oh, I think we lost you. You there?
No,
Yep.
my.
All right, you came back.
Oh, okay. I don't know why. I think it's my headphones. But
Yeah.
she actually got the woman who had spirited away, took away Bonnie Prince Charlie to the Isle of Skye, all that stuff. She came to America, and I believe she came to South Carolina and started rallying together troops for King George III,
Yep.
to fight the Americans. And then they actually ended up getting, they did not do well in South Carolina, or yeah, it didn't turn out very well for them.
Hmm.
But yeah,
Oh, it's cutting out again. We
here,
may have to call it. You back?
yeah, I'm here.
Okay.
You hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's either the Wi-Fi or my headphones or something. So
Yeah. Well, we've been going for almost 2 hours, so it's definitely a lot of bandwidth.
yeah, but
It could be
anyhow,
my internet. I don't know. AT&T is probably getting like another solar flare or something.
oh, probably.
Whatever.
But yeah, there's my spiel on that.
Yeah. No, that's pretty good. I think we covered just about every single topic that you could cover about the French and Indian War. That was pretty in depth.
Yeah, yeah, and I studied French and Indian War very heavily in 2021.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's been a few years, but it's really interesting history. Uh, it's brutal.
Yeah, it was definitely a ruthless war. You there?
I don't know if you can hear me. Hello, hello,
Yeah,
hello.
okay, yeah, you're cut. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's cutting in and out. We should,
Okay. Well, that might be a sign that we're or call
yeah,
it a night.
I think so. But at least we got to cover like pretty much everything. So
Oh yeah.
and more. So I appreciate you coming on here. That was really good.
Yeah. No problem. Glad to be on.
Yep. So we'll do another one next week. I'm not sure what topic we're gonna cover, but if you're watching this and you have any suggestions, just drop them down in the comments section, and we'll figure out what movie we'll talk about next week. Maybe it'll be Waterloo. I don't know. But all right, guys. Well, appreciate you watching, and we will see y'all next week or next Friday for the next Volley Fire Friday.